So crappy. Okay, we're live. I'm gonna wait a minute here and see if anybody would like to join us. Okay. And that. Okay. What's up, everybody? Are you the viewer?
I think so.
Oh, there's two now. Okay, welcome. Forum numero tres. This is exciting. I've been enjoying it, and I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Also, I turned on the Q&A application inside of the Hangout. So if you're watching on the YouTube video, there may be some pop-up that says join the conversation, and you can click there and follow it to the event page and ask questions if you have something to ask. We did have a few questions posted in the event page and some messages, so I'll talk about them, but we seem to have, we'll have some extra free time. So please type your questions into the Q&A app, and I will do my best to answer them for you. I hope everyone's having a nice time in the course if you're taking it, and that you're all making beautiful music, literally. Okay, let's start with some of the Facebook posts. Let me find them. Okay, I'm also gonna, no, I'm not gonna share my screen yet. We'll get there. Okay, so Bruno, Louise De Paula, asked, how do you add tension? How can I add tension to my songs? And I think that that's a really great question. Actually, when I said it out loud, Cody here said, valid question. We talk about this all the time in the songwriting department and in music production in general. So I think that this is kind of a ubiquitous question of how do you build tension or create release. They're definitely related right to each other. And I think that there's a bunch of ways that you can do that. So you specifically asked you said the word song. So I'm going to talk about it in terms of a song form, or a relatively traditional idea of how songs are formed. So unstable and stable, sad day, happy day, right? Like you can't have one without the other. If every day was happy, then none of them would be any different than the other, and so thus it would not be happier or less happy. And the same is true with music. You have to have loud in order to have soft. You have to have release in order to have tension. So knowing how to handle both of those is really important as you make music. But so you have to think about all the tools that you have: rhythms, melodies, harmonies, lyrics, sound sources, audio effects. As a producer and working inside of a computer, you have so many tools. So which ones are you going to use to create tension? If it was a really very common example of how this happens in EDM or any electronic genre for that matter is a acceleration, rhythmic acceleration. So we're thinking rhythms. This is going to be like improvised and funny, but you know, if we start with a quarter note, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2. Now we're on an 8th note and triple it, and then we're going and all the way up to like 128th notes, 64, 30 seconds, right? If you and that's really just math. So you can accelerate, or you can do the opposite. You can decelerate. You can go to halftime to really create a lot of space, which is in some ways also tense. So a lot of times you have to create contrast, which is directly related to tension. What did you have before? What can you do differently to create that sense of instability? Because you deviate from what you've already done. Harmonically, you can do that with different types of sounds. If you're in a certain key, you could use chords that are a little unstable. Subdominants typically are good in creating instability because they have a sense of momentum, like they're definitely going somewhere. And where they're headed, no one knows except you. Non-chord tones, ninths, 13th, sixths, sevenths definitely will create attention. Using chords you haven't used before, or like a one chord over its third or its ninth, changing the bass motion, or having the chords continue to move while maintaining one bass note. That's a really great use of a pedal point to create tension. Melodically, you can land on notes that aren't diatonic to the chord that you're particularly in, or the key. So like a flat 9 or a sharp 9. These are pretty musical examples. And so with the audio effects processing, or the tools themselves, you can create tension by having something open, like a filter, the cutoff frequency on a low pass filter opening up, or a beat repeat, having something accelerate with the rhythmic components of it, adding delays, adding distortion, pretty much anything you could think of. You just have to ask yourself, what came before? What expectation have I set up? Have I set up a clear pattern of da 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 da. That's simple, but it's very typical, right? One phrase, match phrase, match phrase, match phrase. And then to move forward, what would you do? What's different than what came before? That will create tension by setting up an expectation and then deviating from that expectation. Okay, so Ken, what's up, Ken? Ken is, we interact a lot on Facebook, the internet, so it's always nice to see you, and thanks for commenting. So Ken wants to know, could I discuss the importance of gain staging and what it is? Absolutely. Gain staging is one of the most important, if not the most important part of making something sound good. And a lot of times people say, like, I'm going to add reverb, make it sound better. And then usually it gets out of hand, or everything you do with your creative effects gets out of hand because you didn't properly gain stage and the volume levels are all over the place. So when you're using a computer to make music, there are typically there's more than one gain stage. If you're recording audio, then there's a gain stage right on your audio interface, and that's how much signal is actually coming in from one source and out into another. So that's really what gain staging, the definition of it, is managing signal, how much signal is coming from one input to an output. So coming into my interface, there's a certain level, and then I dictate what the level of that is, the gain stage. That comes into my computer, and then each track, each audio track, MIDI track itself has another gain stage, which I manipulate by pulling the fader up or down, which then feeds into my master track, which also has a gain stage, right? So you can see at every turn, you have the option of turning something up or turning something down. And depending on how you approach that, it will affect the overall sound. You want to make sure that you aren't too loud. The default is typically people want to turn things up, when the answer really is, if you want to hear more of something, don't turn it up. Turn everything else down. And that's more labor intensive, but that's where you really separate the kids from the adults in terms of sound quality, is, you know, taking the time to really manage and maintain those gain stages. So I'd say the overall thing you want to really make sure you're monitoring all the time, and I mean that in not in the terms of a listening, but checking the meter on the master, on Ableton or Logic or whatever it is you're using. You want to get an overall level that's close to unity, or right where the fader is by default when you open a session. That's unity, right? You want to get close to it, but you don't ever want to go over. Green means go, yellow means slow down, red means stop, right? So stay in the green, but you also want to leave a little bit of headroom. And so the lower volume, or the lower dynamic areas, You want to have at least halfway up the meter, and then you never want to go over unity. So maintaining your gain stages so that you're in that sweet spot is hard to do in the beginning, but the more you practice it and the more you manage those gain stages, the better everything sounds. You create more space in your mix by maintaining a control over the volume of every single component, or the gain stage of those components. And when you add audio effects like reverb or phasers or anything, it does affect that gain stage. Especially with reverb, you're putting it in a space, right? And depending on how large or small that digital space is, it may take more time for that sound to travel to those imaginary walls and reflect back to us. So that will affect the volume or the gain stage. So you also have to manage those as well as you move through the session. It's a really great question. Okay, Lisa, yay! What are your favorite apps to link with Ableton Live? Can you record to live what you've played in the app? This is also a really great question, because I just ran into this the other day. Okay, what are my favorite apps to link to Ableton Live? I rewire Logic or Reason into Ableton a lot of the times, but I don't necessarily use any apps like a Moog emulator or a Lemur or anything. There's like a lot of things I've played with kind of outside of connecting it to Ableton. And you can use different types of digital mixers in order to route that sound into Ableton Live. In fact, just setting this chat up requires a huge amount of internal routing on my computer. I can just quickly show you guys. Share screen. Boom. I'm going to share that screen. Okay. So, AudioCast. Oh, it's just so crazy. Okay, so this is the digital mixer I'm using right here. And you can see it's taking different sound sources from my built-in microphone. I also have Ableton running in through here, coming in to this chat. So I'm using a digital mixer to do that. And the input and the output that I'm using are actually something called Soundflower, which is a product which is no longer supported, oddly enough. Cycling 74 originally made Soundflower, and it's a digital input and output that you can use in order to route audio from different applications into Ableton Live, or not even just Ableton, any application, one virtual application into another virtual application. So you can use it to route audio directly into Ableton, but I wish there was an easier answer. For instance, on the OS or the iOS platform, there's an amazing app called Audio Bus. And it basically just takes everything that you might possibly want to route, say, like your Reason beat making app on your iPad, and you want to route that into GarageBand. It will just handle it for you kind of seamlessly. And so I wish that there was an Audio Bus application for the OS platform, for the computer platform. And it really just doesn't exist right now. So routing from one application into the next application can be really difficult when you're working with digital audio workstations. There's the functionality inside of Ableton that's called Rewire, which will master or slave another application to it. So it can be the master, and it can control what the MIDI clock is happening when you press start and stop, or it can slave and follow another application's MIDI clock, right? So it can get really complicated in how you put them all together. But either way, I'd say it's not the easiest thing to do, but it can be done using Soundflower or Rewire, depending on the type of application that you're using. Okay, I'll show you an app that I love, and would like to start using inside of Ableton. So I have yet to do this. Is Equator live here? Yes, it is. Okay, sharing. Equator. Oh, this is so cool. Okay, so this is Equator. This is a synthesizer that I've been really diving into, and it's very hefty in terms of its CPU usage. So it sends messages that Ableton can't handle. It sends MPE messages, which stands for multi-dimensional polyphonic expressive data. And without diving into the depths of how MIDI data gets received and transmitted, this thing, if I ran it in Ableton, it glitches, basically. And anytime I try to play more than one note at a time, it glitches. So a lot of times I will actually run the audio from this application, and I'll have it go directly into my Apogee. Let's say, for instance, it's not connected right now. And I would run that out of out one, and then right back into my interface, and then back into Ableton. So sometimes I hardwire these things. And that's the thing that seems to work the best for me here. So again, not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but definitely can be done. So I explained 3 different ways you could do it, right? Rewire from app to app, well, workstation to workstation rather. Soundflower for different app into a track, and then a hardwire running through an audio interface through one of the outputs back in through the input and into an input, and then back into Ableton. Okay, back to my Hangouts. Stopping this sharing. Okay, look at that. Awesome. All right, let's look at some of these other questions that we have. Where did I put them? I should probably close Equator, because even when it's not running, it takes up a lot of CPU. Okay. This is, let's see, I've got 2. Okay, here's a question that'll be easy to answer. I just wanted to ask you if you have thought about doing an in-depth course about sound design in the future. So, funny that you ask. Yes, I am writing one. I just finished writing the first draft of it, actually. And it's going to be, actually, it's very closely tied to that synthesizer that I showed you, Equator. So there's a company in the UK called Roli, R-O-L-I. And they make these really just cutting edge controllers that have that MPE data connection, which I was speaking about, the multi-dimensional polyphonic expressive data. So it's really tied to the gestures that you make, send different messages. And it's this deep connection to the sound, this tactile, deep connection to the sound, which is fascinating me right now. And so I've been doing a lot of research and learning a lot about how all these things work together and what's going on. And so now I'm in the process of finishing up writing a course on behalf of Roli, which basically is just dumbing a lot of this music synthesis stuff down so that everybody can use it, everyone can understand it. There's a lot of these products and a lot of these tools that we talk about, even Ableton, they can be so complex if you want to approach them a certain way. But I tend to want to kind of dumb things down so that I can be more musical, right? That's my approach to teaching. My approach to making music with technology is just let my creativity lead, and the rest is kind of just the nuts and bolts. And you don't have to understand force and friction and all that to use a hammer, right? You could just use a hammer. So I'm writing this course for music synthesis, which is that. We talk about what's an envelope and how does an LFO work? How do we use that? What's an oscillator? What are the different types of waves that you can choose from? What are the most common parameters that you would tweak when you're using any synthesizer. So yes, I have written that, and it's going to be free online on YouTube in early May. So I'm going out to the UK to shoot this. We're just doing our final drafts of all the edits, and I'm going to go shoot it in London, and it'll be available as a video course with Blend and Rolly together, because actually Rolly bought Blend. So that's how I got pulled into this whole thing, using Blend on the Coursera MOOC, and then they were then acquired by another company, and they want to duplicate this idea of how to make music for the masses, and how do we give this information to people on you know, in an open source way. So I do have the course. I'm really excited to share it with everybody. I use a lot of metaphor in order to talk about sound design. I recently took a course called Teaching Transformational Teachers, TTT. And they talk a lot about using really simple images to teach very complex ideas like sound design. You know, like what is an image I can show you that when you look at it, it makes total sense when you think about a synthesizer. So I've spent such a huge amount of time writing this thing, and I'm very excited to share it with you in May, and I'll make sure to post about it all the time. So follow my socials, keep up with it, and you know, there's actually even been talk about another MOOC. So perhaps I'd say maybe in the fall or in the spring, next spring, we'll be doing another level with Berklee Online for Coursera. And that would be really cool. All right, let's see. Is anybody else asking anything?
Yeah, we had a question on the Facebook page. What are your must-have plugins while mixing?
Great question. What are my must-have plugins while mixing? Let's see. Let's go look at Ableton. Okay, you're sharing the screen. All right, cool. Oh, I just bought these new Mellotron, this Mellotron pack. I'll talk about that later. I don't want to get sidetracked. So I honestly try to use as many native audio effects as I can within Ableton. And I do that for a number of reasons. A lot of these are just plain and simple useful, right? And I've gotten very accustomed to the workflow of a lot of them. So for instance, this EQ8, what track did I put this on? Yeah, it's on there. The spectrum analyzer here, so I can see exactly where all of this is coming through. I really depend on the EQ8. I do use some other EQs, especially when I'm like mixing for a final mix. I'll swap out like an SSL channel EQ or whatever, the massive passive EQ. I'm really into that. But the other reason is because all these native plugins are going to be the least CPU taxing. So, you know, this EQ takes up a lot less time or a lot less power than, let's go look at a Waves version of this. I don't know if this is showing up. If I share Ableton, I don't know if these pop plugins are going to show up. I'm just going to pray and hope that they are showing up and that you can see this. But anyways, so this is, we'll just A and B, these two.
They're not showing up.
No?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to fix this. Okay, stop sharing Ableton, and I'm going to share my entire screen. Okay, this should work. So here's the EQ8 down here. You can see I've got my 8 different bands and the spectrum analyzer. And then here's an SSL channel EQ. So you can see they're visually totally different. I don't have a spectrum analyzer on this Waves plugin, but this is a digital emulation of an amazing piece of hardware. It's actually an old SSL board channel, and it adds a different life and vibe to it. So a lot of times it's like, what am I doing and what's the purpose of that? So if I'm just mixing in a general way, I'll tend to use all of the native plugs. And then if I'm doing a final mix, I try to keep an even balance of using the hefty plugins and then using the native ones in order to get what I want. Usually my mixes, I push it to the edge. I push my computer right to the edge of its CPU power. So it's really important to manage those things. The other ones that I love that are native, the saturator, I think is a really great one, especially to get overdrive here. What else do I like a lot? Utility. I definitely use this the most. It's the most useful of all the plugins. For gain control, a lot of times if I'm on a track and I want to, automate some of the volume, I'll actually go and I will automate device on gain. Actually, automate using the utility as opposed to the volume, so that I can always just, go back to this fader here and pull this up and down. But the utility, the overall messages that I wrote into a clip or a track, if you was here in the linear view, maintain. So I have like an extra gain stage, actually, to go back to what we were speaking about earlier. Let's see what else I like to use. The tuner is super useful. I do use that a lot. Glue compressor is pretty great. Corpus, I like this a lot. So Corpus is an interesting plugin, and I don't have a third party for this, so I use this one a lot. It's native inside of Ableton. And another way to visualize this, instead of the word corpus, think of a body, right? It's like putting it inside of a body. So right here, you can choose the different types of body. So I'm going to put, this is a Mellotron. This is like a tape machine playing back. It's kind of cool. So I'm going to turn this off and we can just hear it. So now when I turn this on, I'm actually going to have it be in the marimba. I'm going to put it inside of a membrane. Let's put it inside of a tube. Beam. String. Create some oscillation within that sound. So this, I really love Corpus. And actually, if you go to the presets here, there's a lot of really cool, great ones, especially this sub filter and sub kick maker. The default of, let's see, if I put this on here, you can see it's 100% dry wet on the sub filter booster, which is 100% almost too much. You really only want 2 or 3%. So yeah, the presets in this folder I think are really great. Auto pan I use all the time. I do this to create a ring modulation. If I go up 100% and then I put them directly in phase, so I've got 360 phase and 100% amount, this is a ring modulator, straight up. So I use the auto pan a lot. The auto filter is, ever since 9.5, this just keeps getting better and better. Putting the different types of analog emulations. It's a digital plugin here of an analog filter. The drive and the resonance knob here, they're my favorite too. And in terms of third-party stuff, I'm a waves lady. I'm a waves lady. I have a good relationship with this company, and I took a retail training, so I was given the Mercury bundle, and I use it all the time on everything. Some of the ones I really like here are this Red 17, especially for overdrive here. This is one of the Abbey Road plugins that they have. What else do I love here? The CLA, Chris Lord Alge. In my training, I learned all about him. All the CLA stuff I think is really great. These are, LA2A is an old compressor, the 3A, LA3A, and these are fantastic versions of them. And then Max for Live, I'm really into the convolution reverbs. So let's go here. Convolution. That's instruments. Audio effects. Here they are. And it's kind of overwhelming how many of them are. You can see I'm still just in this one folder. But so I haven't even checked all of these out. I'm really into plate reverbs though. So I go usually just type in plate and you can see how many of these there are. Let's go rich plate. So I'm actually putting this on a return. So Max for Live comes up, and I have just gotten so much into Max for the past couple of years. This is a pretty taxing CPU taxing device, but hey, reverb's worth it. A little bit of grit there. The Red 17 on this probably doesn't make a lot of sense because this is already distorted. It's like actually tape that they're sampling. So it's interesting. It's MIDI and it's audio. So yes, I'm really into these convolution reverbs. A couple of months ago, Cody actually introduced me to the Pitch and Time devices, and I'm really into these. The harmonizer, the dual harmonizer. I love this one. Oh boy. So this is really similar to the Micro Shift plugin from Sound Toys. So if you pitch 5 cents up and 5 cents down the right and the left side of this channel, turning it off, really clear, and then this is going to be detuning them just slightly. So it fattens it up. It makes the sound a little bit bigger. So I love this dual harmonizer, and it takes up less power than the micro shifter, and I don't have to have my iLock for that. Boom, winning. I know, right? Auto tunes. This Pitch and Time pack is just really great. I love Instant House. Let's see. Where are you? Is that a MIDI device?
We do have a couple other questions if you ever get tired of talking about plugins.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, if anyone's into house music, you need to download this. It's called Instant House, H-A-U-S, by Alex Kidd. And it is like the coolest thing ever. I love this. It makes making music really fun and really fast. So those are my faves. All right. What else? Who else? What else?
Razor Jane asks, at what point do you convert your MIDI to audio in Ableton to get the best audio quality? For example, though drum rack can be convenient, my tendency is to separate all drum tracks into their own tracks and use audio samples.
Okay, so I think the drums are the one thing that I don't ever convert. Let me pull up a drum rack here. Drum rack is super duper deep, and you can do so much effects processing just right within the kit itself. Just just gonna pull some random stuff on here. Actually, that's probably not what I should pull on. Pull something a little bit less arbitrary. Okay, we'll put a kick and a clap on here. So when I open up the device chain here, you can see I can add sends and returns. I can drop a reverb right on to, in fact, I'm gonna put one of those max reverbs right on this convolution reverb. We'll just pull this one on there. So now I have this max for live reverb on. I want you to be bigger. And see. Why is the knob not? Oh, sends. Because I had that closed. So I can open the sends and returns right inside of the drum kit, right? So if I've got this, here's my clap, dry, very wet. So I can do a lot of internal routing with audio effects right inside of the drum kit. And a lot of times it's the last thing I convert because I'll compose my percussive foundations, right? And I do the whole thing, and then I sound replaced with different live players, and then I comp all the vocals, and I have everything going. And then I tend to go back in and try to lock in the kick drum with the bass part even more. And so I tend to want to move those MIDI events around a lot, especially at the last minute. And I think that the groove is one of the things that's so connected to what's going on that I always want to be able to manipulate it as much as I can. And MIDI has such flexible audio editing techniques that or MIDI editing, it's audio and it's MIDI, right? Because these are audio samples, but it's MIDI events, right? So this I tend to keep MIDI forever, and I just do so much parallel and serial audio effects processing right inside of the drum kit. Everything else I tend to convert right before I put a ton of plugins on, right? So right before I do a huge mix. And let me see if I can just open something here that'll make a little bit more sense. So this is another session from a different, it doesn't matter what it is. It's a different session, and this is completed. So there's a huge amount of audio effects on this thing. Let's pray. Okay. So let me. So here you can see, here's the drums, and they're still MIDI, but everything else is audio. Right? So I've got two bass parts here, and so these are inside of a group. This is a bus. This is they're all running through the same glue compressor, but it's bass 1, and then there's bass 2, and then here is where the MIDI actually is. So I saved it. I just turned it off, and I made this conversion right before the mix. And same is true here for all these other things. The synth lead, here's the MIDI, and it's just turned off. So I tend to do it right before I mix, and I just keep everything in case I want to deviate and do something else. So yeah, I try to keep it MIDI as long as I can because it's the most flexible. But it's a balancing act because the virtual instruments can be really taxing on your computer, and so can the audio effects. So sometimes you just have to decide where am I allocating those resources and when do you want to switch. I know a lot of people who are really good at manipulating things as a lot of some older school people or people who come from like linear audio centric DAWs. They're so good at manipulating things as audio that they'll want to convert immediately, right? And that's not how I do things. I'm more of a MIDI person, so I convert a lot later than somebody else would. So yeah, That's a pretty comprehensive answer to your question. Oh wait, what else did she say? Oh, and record at 2488.1. That's another interesting concept too, is the sample rate and bit depth. So she's saying that she records at 2488.1K, which is a really it's a high fidelity recording. So the higher the resolution, the more processing power it takes up. So sometimes your computer, you know, if life was, if I had everything I needed all the time, I'd be recording at 96 nonstop. But it's not always an option because of the limitations of what's on my computer, all the plugins I have here, where am I going to be working, who am I going to be working for, how much time do I have, what's their budget. It all plays into those types of decisions. Okay, these are all really great questions. I have one more from the Facebook page that we can check out. Go back to, okay. I think this person's name is Simon. He says, I'm a newbie at this whole Ableton world. I've been DJing for about 4 years and producing some simple songs, but I get bored with just mixing and I want to start learning how to produce on the fly, like a live set. But I feel that everything I do sounds monotonous and empty. What tips or techniques do you recommend to have a bigger and fuller sound when playing live? He has humble gear. I like that. Just a tablet to control Ableton Live clips and an M Audio Code 25. So that's a interface, I believe.
It's a little controller.
It's a controller?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see that.
Code 25.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, never seen that.
It looks like a drawing. That doesn't even look like the real thing, right?
Yeah, that's weird.
What can I do with this small gear to produce more complete music when playing live? And then apologizes for this very long question. Well, no need to apologize, Simon, because that's a great question. How do you do a lot with a little? And you can with Ableton. It's gonna allow you to do so much. So I think that question is multifaceted. It's not just the stuff you have. It has to do with the sound sources that you're using, first and foremost. If you're doing things like generating kick drum patterns to bridge from one song to a next and during your DJ set, that sample that you choose for the kick drum is going to be really important. And if you're using the ones that come native with Ableton, it's not going to sound as good as the ones that you're juxtaposing next to these finished records, you know, because those records have been mixed, mastered, limited, so they're going to be loud and they're going to be big. And if you're just taking kind of like a dinky kick drum sample and then you start playing it in between the tracks, it's not going to sound as good. So making sure you have the highest fidelity and fattest sample you could possibly get is important. Here's what I would do, all right? If I was playing house music, I would go find a Disclosure record and find a song where it just starts with the kick drum. And I know for certain, like half of them do, right? I would go, I would throw one of those MP3s into a pad on a drum rack and I would just isolate that kick drum. And that kick drum's gonna be fat and that kick drum's gonna be loud, right? And so then using that sound sample that matches the records that I'm spinning, I would use that and use those sound sources to create the loops on the fly as I'm DJing, right? So I think that's actually really smart, what I just suggested. But you could also go to some beefy libraries, like you could find some kick drums from Contact that are really great, or different smaller packs, like you could buy a Illmatic, the boom clap. Will you look up Illmatic?
Yeah. What about
The
it? They have samples.
His pack. What are those called? Blap. The Blap kits. The Illmatic Blap kits are really cool, and you can get some fat sounds from this guy. And so I think you can just buy those one off. How much is it? Does it say?
The main thing I'm finding is
Illmind Blap kit. Yep. How much are those?
$25.
$25 for a Blap kit. I think it's worth it. Buy a Blap kit. The other thing that you want to do is think about the 3D-ness of the whole thing. And I talk about this in the course a lot. The sound source is number one, but those recordings, the other things that's different about them is that they're stereo. So you want to make sure that maybe you have two kicks. You duplicate the same kick and pan them to the side. One to the right, one to the left a little bit. So you get much more kind of width to the whole thing. You want to mess with the volumes to make sure that they're about right. So when you're DJing especially, you have to kind of balance the premeditative, I don't even know if that's a word, how much you plan something. It's like, what songs am I going to play? Make sure they're all good levels, so you're not, you know, have this huge disparate loud and softness. And then doing the same thing with the samples. You know, I'm all for improvising when using technology. I think that's great. But you have to have a general balance of knowing which tools you're going to use, making sure the volumes are okay, the EQing sounds good before you get to that improvisational part of it. And then you'll be happier with the results on stage. If you're at home and you're improvising with the technology, don't worry about that kind of stuff, right? Just play, just push buttons, practice with the patterns of generating them on the fly and incorporating them into your DJ sets. But then when it comes time to perform that DJ set, have at least the drum kits put together and everything gain staged and processed the way that you want to, and then plug in that play part of it on stage with the devices ready to go, so that you sounds fat, sounds good, and inevitably you'll have a better performance because you'll feel like it's sounding good. Everyone's gonna like it more. That's how you can get a little bit more depth to what it is you're doing. But probably the biggest thing is the sample itself that you're using as a part of this new pattern that you're creating.
That makes me wonder what your philosophies are on blending and layering sounds to get something that's fatter.
You want to say hi? This is Cody. He's here every month.
Kind of off to the side. Don't want to distract you.
Cody's here all the time. So if you're typing in a question or whatever, he'll let me know. And then he'll also, on the Facebook page, if you're typing and writing in and you have a question and I'm not answering it here, he'll answer it for you on the internet. It's amazing how connected we are. What is my philosophy about? I mean, Timbaland, sorry, is like he's layering master, right? So with a kick drum, if you're building your own kick drum, then I say layer. Find one that's punchy, find one that's subby, find one that is boxy, whatever. Like, find a bunch of different kick drums and put them all into one kit and see if you can build something that fits what you're hearing from scratch. But that's more sound design in a way, right? So if you are designing those sounds, then yes, you should definitely layer. If you're pulling from someplace else, like that Disclosure track or something, I don't know how far you want to push that kick drum beyond where it already is, because that's probably like 3 kick drums already. So understanding where the sound source comes from and really using your ears, saying like, does this need another layer? Yes or no. A lot of the times I feel like with layering and with audio effects processing, it's really similar to tuning a guitar, right? When you're flat, you can hear it very clearly that you're not in tune. And so typically when you're playing something, you go, until you get right there. And it's the same thing with audio effects. If there's too much reverb, you can really clearly hear that. So you have to go like as far as you can take it, right? Be like, this is way too many kick drums. You know, I've got 8 happening right now, and maybe 3 is what you actually want. So just put too much on and then pull away until it sounds right, because too less or too much is really clear to hear. Just right is very hard to hear. So if you can strip away or add too much or too little, you at least know what those are, and then you can narrow it down to know to find out exactly how many layers is the right layer. Same thing with synthesizers, like mid-range frequencies. I see a lot of people just like, I need more synth. Right? And yeah, I mean, more synths, but you want to make sure that, you know, depending on how many lines there are, it's like how many melodies do you want to layer as well, right? This is like a very large concept of layering within a kick drum, within synthesizers, within melodies. It's like you have to be respectful of what's happening. But I see a lot of people pulling a lot of distorted saw wave synths into their music. You know, and there'll be a big, really pad in the background, and then there'll be a lead line on there too, and then a saw bass also. And that's bad, right? Because it's so much distortion that everything else loses its roundness. And this kind of goes back to the tension. How do you create tension? By having release. How do you create really fat sounds? Is by having sounds that aren't so fat in there to juxtapose with them. So, you know, having a round sound like a sine wave lead, and then having a different type of a saw or a triangle as a pad, and then maybe like 3 different types of bass, a sub bass when it's got a little bit more of attack up front, and then a distorted wave also playing the same line can be really good, but you have to create diversity within those layers. And then making sure they're not stepping on top of each other. If you have one really fat synth layer, you don't want to put another lead line on top of that to cover it, unless there's a really good reason for doing that. Okay. So this, I guess the only other thing I see here, I had one question from Twitter that I don't think got answered in the chat, because this guy was like maybe 20 minutes too late. But so Johnny Reynolds, 808, that's a dope name. Also at Bass Exotic, this guy likes his low end. He uses Ableton to produce a lot, but really wants to get into live performance. And I get that from a lot of people, you know, like how similarly tied are they together? How do I get into live performance? So we'll just close with this last idea. You know, when I'm teaching people how to use Ableton, I specifically start them, and you'll have noticed this if you took the Coursera class, you start in the nonlinear workflow, okay? You compose. You use it as a creative tool, first and foremost. You don't worry about technically how this comes together or how this works. And by harnessing the workflow of that nonlinear side of the software, you can then translate those skills into writing, performing, composing. I teach with it, educating, right? It's a platform. And so if you're producing and you're working in the linear workflow a lot, I would suggest that you switch over to the nonlinear workflow and start really getting a handle on the power of liberating yourself from a timeline. Because those skills translate to however you want to work, whether it's in a studio or on a stage. And then once you have that together, the only other thing you really need to perform live is a vision of what you want to see accomplished. Are you pushing buttons? Are you playing an instrument? Are you wearing a motorcycle helmet and no one sees your face? Like, that's what and then you back into it. It's like, okay, now I know how to use the nonlinear workflow, and I know what I want to do or what I want to appear and seem like and tactile, what my hands are doing, then the rest is just you connecting those dots. Like, how do you accomplish that thing that you see yourself doing? Maybe you have to do a couple days of Google searching to find out how that's possible, but you just piece it together by yourself. And then as you continue to perform, you'll have more ideas and you'll want to do different types of things, and you'll come into contact with other tools that are built for what it is you're supposed to be doing. And the next thing you know, you've got like a DMX's rig and a third person that's off stage just running your computer visuals. You know, I don't know. But for me, that's how it happened. And I actually came into using the software from a live stage platform. I never entered the linear workflow for like 2 years. I never did. It's crazy, but I've been using Pro Tools for so long, it never even dawned on me, like, why would I use the linear workflow in Ableton? You know, and it's strange. I think that's a unique situation where I'd had what I needed from a linear DAW. I didn't need Ableton to do that. And then, so I was really only using it for its non-linear workflow and to perform on stage, which is ultimately what it's built for. So, you know, and nobody taught me how to do it. I just Googled the shit out of it until I got done what I needed to do. And sometimes when I look back on videos of myself, like there's some videos from 2011 that are so ridiculous. But they're still really cool because I had no idea what was going on. My levels were like all over the place, but I was really in it mentally, creatively. I was in my zone and I was performing and it was fun. And then I refined it over a really long period of time. So if you're that person who makes music and produces and wants to get into performing, first and foremost, go non-lin. Non-linear for life. And then try to even just at your home, try to put on some sort of a performance. Like, can you manipulate this music live? Can you dig your hands into the technology? The answer is yes. You just have to dive in and not really care about what the results are. It's also a really important part. Just don't judge yourself too much. When you're making music on stage with a computer at first, it's gonna be shaky because you're not really in control of it in the beginning. And it can scare you. Like, and Cody can attest to this. He was in my non-lin class at Berkeley, and I make everybody do a performance, and it's really anxiety inducing the first time you do it, especially live in front of other people, because you're just like, oh man, like, I don't know what's gonna happen, because every time you do it, it's different, right? And it's because this shit is alive. And actually, you were having that latency issue, weren't you?
Yeah, there were some real bad issues with just like, yeah, CPU getting like pushed too much and stuff like that. But
it was just in that room, not when you were practicing.
Yeah, that's the strange part.
So we got to the performance space and we plugged in, and there was so much latency that he wasn't able to perform. And so we had to do some last minute routing in order to make it so that he could perform. But just that in and of itself, like, that's such a small thing, but had such a huge impact. And, you know, every single person that day before they performed, it's like right before they were going to press the button, like their limbs were shaking and everybody was like bright red and sweating, and it's so much fun. But at the end of it, it was like we had such solidarity as a group, like we'd almost gone to war with each other or something. And it's so cool. Like, I love the live performance aspect of this, and it's really what drew me to it in the first place. It's alive. Okay, guys, so that's it. This was a really good one. I didn't stop the broadcast on accident. We had really good questions. This is a nice amount of viewers in here also. So I'm thinking about in the future doing some like themed forums, perhaps. Like, this one's going to be about MIDI controllers, and then this one's going to be about audio effects processing or whatever. So if you guys have any ideas or anything you want to share about what you would like to see, what you would like to hear from me, please send me a message to my Facebook account. It's Aaron Mama Bera, and I'm gonna make all your dreams come true. All right, see you guys next time.